The Caltharian War Council chamber fell silent as the holographic display updated with the latest battlefield reports. Admiral Vextar's four eyes narrowed as he studied the tactical readout, his chitinous fingers drumming against the crystalline command table. The siege of Kepler Station had entered its 14th day, and the human defenders were proving far more resilient than anticipated. Status report, Vextar commanded, his translator rendering his clicks and hisses into standard galactic. Subcommander Hixel's tentacles writhed nervously as she approached the display. The humans have established defensive positions throughout the station's lower levels. Our ground forces have secured the upper decks, but progress has stalled. They've destroyed most of their own weapons rather than allow them to fall into our appendages. How many humans remain? Scans indicate approximately 300 survivors, sir. They've barricaded themselves in the hydroponics bay and adjacent quarters. No heavy weapons detected, minimal energy signatures from small arms. Vextar's mandibles clicked in what his species considered amusement. 300 weaponless humans against our 7,000 warriors. This siege should have ended cycles ago. The hologram shifted to display the hydroponics section. Massive growing chambers stretched across multiple levels, filled with earth crops that had become popular trade commodities throughout the galaxy. The humans had chosen their final stand well. The bay contained the station's primary life support systems, making orbital bombardment impossible without destroying the valuable infrastructure they'd come to capture. Sir, interrupted communications officer Zeth, his scaled head turning toward the admiral. We're receiving a transmission from the human position. On speakers. Static crackled through the chamber before a human voice emerged, speaking accented standard. This is Commander Sarah Chen of Kepler Station. I'm requesting a parley under Article 12 of the Galactic Warfare Convention. Vextar's primary eyes focused on the communication panel. Humans and their obsession with rules and protocols, even in defeat. Patch me through. He waited for the connection confirmation. This is Admiral Vextar of the Caltharian Third Fleet. Your position is hopeless, human. Surrender now and your people will be processed according to standard protocols. With respect, Admiral, I have a different proposal. Single combat. One of yours against one of mine. Winner takes the station. The War Council erupted in chittering laughter. Subcommander Hixel's tentacles fluttered in what her species considered humor. Sir, surely they jest. A single human against one of our warriors? Vextar silenced the chamber with a raised claw. There was something in the human commander's voice, not desperation, but confidence. It intrigued him. Interesting proposal, Commander Chen. But why would I agree to such terms when victory is already assured? Because, Admiral, you've been stuck outside our door for 2 weeks. Your superiors are asking questions. Your fleet is burning fuel and resources. And, deep down, you're curious whether the stories about humans in single combat are true. The chamber fell silent. The stories were indeed known throughout the galaxy, whispered tales of human resilience and unpredictability that most civilized species dismissed as primitive mythology. Vextar had heard them during his academy days, humans who fought beyond the point of logical defeat, who turned disadvantage into victory through sheer bloody-minded determination. What terms do you propose? Each side sends one champion. No weapons, no armor, no enhancements. Just flesh and bone and will. Standard gravity, neutral atmosphere. If your warrior wins, we surrender unconditionally. If ours wins, you withdraw from Kepler Station and guarantee safe passage for our civilians. Subcommander Hixel's tentacles writhed in agitation. Sir, this is madness. Even if they somehow achieved victory, the precedent would be catastrophic. We cannot appear weak before agreed, Vextar said, cutting her off. Tomorrow, at the junction between Section C and D and neutral ground. The connection ended, leaving the War Council in stunned silence. Hixel was first to speak, her voice tight with concern. Sir, may I ask why you've agreed to this primitive display? Vextar studied the tactical display, his mind already working through possibilities. Because, Sub-Commander, we are warriors first. And, because I want to see what makes these humans so confident in the face of certain death. He paused, his compound eyes reflecting the chamber's light. Besides, what can one weaponless human possibly do against Warrior Prime Gorlak? The mention of Gorlak sent approving clicks through the assembled officers. Standing 3 meters tall and massing nearly 400 kilograms of muscle and chitin, Gorlak was the 3rd Fleet's champion, undefeated in over 50 formal duels. The human champion, whoever they chose, would be fighting what amounted to a living tank. Have Gorlak report to the ready room for preparation, Vexstar commanded. I want this matter settled quickly and decisively. As the War Council dispersed, Vexstar remained at the tactical display, studying the human positions. Something nagged at him, a detail he couldn't quite place. The humans had been remarkably efficient in their defensive preparations, far more so than their technological level should have allowed. They'd anticipated Caltharian assault patterns with uncanny accuracy, turned the station's civilian infrastructure into effective fortifications, and maintained morale despite impossible odds. He called up the tactical recordings from the first day of the siege. Human defenders had fought with a coordination that spoke of extensive military training, yet intelligence reports indicated Kepler Station was a civilian research facility with minimal security presence. The defenders had improvised weapons from mining equipment and scientific instruments, created explosives from fertilizer and industrial chemicals, and established communications networks that had taken his signals intelligence teams days to decode. Computer, display personnel files for Kepler Station command staff. Holographic profiles materialized above the table. Commander Sarah Chen's file appeared first, age 38, born on Earth's South American continent, civilian administrator with no listed military service. Her education showed advanced degrees in xenobiology and interspecies relations. Nothing in her background suggested the tactical acumen she demonstrated during the siege. But humans were known for their deceptions and misdirection. Vexstar had studied their species extensively during his rise through the fleet hierarchy. They possessed an unusual capacity for adaptation, often excelling in situations that would break other species. Their homeworld was a death trap of competing predators, violent weather, and toxic plant life, yet they'd not only survived but thrived, spreading across the galaxy with remarkable speed. Sir? Communications Officer Zeth's voice interrupted his thoughts. Priority message from Fleet Command. The hologram shifted to display Fleet Admiral Kexthal's imposing form, her 6 arms folded in obvious displeasure. Admiral Vexstar, explain to me why you've agreed to single combat with defeated humans instead of completing your mission. Fleet Admiral, the tactical situation requires you to capture that station intact and eliminate human presence in this sector. Not engage in primitive gladiatorial contests. Vexstar's mandibles clicked slowly, choosing his words carefully. With respect, Fleet Admiral, the siege has drawn considerable attention from neutral governments. Several species have filed formal complaints about civilian casualties. A decisive victory through single combat would demonstrate Caltharian superiority while maintaining our diplomatic standing. Fleet Admiral Kexthal's primary eyes fixed on him through the hologram. You have 12 hours to resolve this situation, Vexstar. If your single combat fails to produce acceptable results, I will order orbital bombardment and explain the infrastructure losses as regrettable but necessary. The transmission ended, leaving Vexstar alone with his thoughts. 12 hours. More than enough time for Gorlak to crush whatever champion the humans produced. Yet something about the human commander's confidence continued to trouble him. Humans were known for their irrationality, but even they wouldn't sacrifice their entire population on an impossible gamble. Unless they knew something he didn't. He activated the internal communications array. Warrior Prime Gorlak to the command chamber. Priority 1. The massive Caltharian warrior entered within minutes, his ceremonial armor reflecting the chamber's lights. Gorlak stood at attention, his natural weapons gleaming, razor-sharp claws, powerful mandibles, and muscle density that could shatter steel. In unarmed combat, he was essentially unstoppable. You summoned me, Admiral? Tomorrow you face a human champion in single combat. The stakes are considerable. Victory gives us the station, defeat means withdrawal. Gorlak's mandibles spread in what served as a Caltharian smile. What manner of human am I to face? Their strongest warrior? Their largest soldier? Unknown. They have yet to select their champion. It matters little. I have faced human combatants before. They break easily once you demonstrate superior force. Vextar nodded, though his unease remained. Nevertheless, prepare thoroughly. Study their anatomy, review their fighting techniques. I want no surprises. Understood, sir. Will there be anything else? Review the tactical recordings from this siege. Pay attention to how they've fought. These humans may be more formidable than they appear. After Gorlak departed, Vextar returned to studying the station schematics. The hydroponics bay where the humans had made their stand was a masterwork of defensive positioning. Multiple levels provided excellent fields of fire, narrow choke points that negated numerical superiority, and backup systems that made the position nearly impossible to assault without destroying the very infrastructure they'd come to capture. But tomorrow's combat would be different. One warrior against another, stripped of technology and tactics, reduced to the fundamental question of which species possessed greater strength of will. In such contests, physical advantages usually proved decisive, and Gorlak possessed every conceivable physical advantage. So why did the human commander sound so confident? The next morning arrived with the artificial dawn cycle of the captured sections. Admiral Vextar stood in the observation deck overlooking the designated combat area, a circular chamber with transparent aluminum walls that had once served as a conference room. Medical teams from both sides flanked the space, though Vextar suspected they would be needed only for the human champion. The Caltharian delegation arrived first. Warrior Prime Gorlak entered the chamber wearing simple combat fatigues, his natural armored hide gleaming under the lights. He moved with the fluid grace of a predator, each step demonstrating the controlled power that had made him champion. Watching him, Vextar felt his confidence return. No human could match such perfect biological efficiency. Admiral, Subcommander Hixel approached with a data pad. Final scans of the human positions show unusual activity in their medical bay. Energy signatures consistent with surgical procedures. Preparing their champion? Possibly. Or treating casualties from our previous assaults. A chime sounded through the observation deck as the human delegation approached. Commander Sarah Chen led the group, her uniform crisp despite 2 weeks of siege conditions. Behind her walked a dozen human soldiers, but Vextar's attention fixed on the figure at the center of their formation. The human champion was female, approximately average height for her species, with dark skin and close-cropped hair. She wore simple exercise clothing that revealed extensive scarring across her arms and legs, evidence of numerous previous conflicts. Her movements displayed obvious military training, but she appeared unremarkable compared to Gorlak's imposing presence. That's their champion? Subcommander Hixel's tentacles writhed in confusion. She barely masses 60 kilograms. Vextar studied the human more carefully. Something about her posture suggested coiled energy, like a predator at rest. Her eyes, pale green, unusual for humans, swept the chamber with analytical precision, cataloging exits and potential weapons with professional thoroughness. Commander Chen activated the communication array. Admiral Vextar, may I present Sergeant Maria Santos, our chosen champion. The human warrior stepped forward and spoke for herself, her voice carrying an accent that Vextar's cultural database identified as originating from Earth's Siberian Peninsula. Honored to face your champion, Admiral. May the better warrior prevail. Indeed, Vextar replied. Are both champions prepared? Both combatants signaled their readiness and entered the circular chamber. Medical sensors activated, monitoring vital signs and documenting the proceedings for official records. According to Galactic Warfare Convention protocols, the combat would continue until one participant yielded or was rendered unable to continue. Gorlak moved to the center of the chamber, his 3-meter frame dominating the space. Sergeant Santos took position across from him, her smaller form almost lost in comparison. The size differential was so extreme that several Caltharian officers chittered in what their species considered amusement. "Beginning official documentation," announced the automated system. Single combat between representatives of Caltharian Third Fleet and human defenders of Kepler Station. Combat to continue until decisive resolution. A warning tone sounded, followed by the starting signal. Gorlak advanced immediately, using his superior reach to test the human's reflexes. His claws swept through empty air as Santos ducked and circled, staying just beyond his range. The Caltharian warrior's first few attacks were conservative, designed to gauge his opponent's capabilities rather than deliver killing blows. Santos moved with fluid grace, her smaller size allowing rapid directional changes that kept her clear of Gorlak's strikes. She studied his attack patterns, learning the rhythm of his movements, mapping the reach of his various natural weapons. To the observers, it appeared she was simply avoiding inevitable defeat, but Vextar noticed something others missed. She was learning. Each exchange taught her more about Gorlak's capabilities and limitations. When he overextended slightly on a claw strike, she noted the recovery time. When he shifted weight to deliver a devastating mandible attack, she catalogued the preparatory movements. Her pale green eyes remained fixed on her opponent with predatory focus. "She cannot avoid him forever," Sub-Commander Hixel observed. "Once he connects, the combat is finished." But, as the engagement continued, Vextar realized Santos wasn't trying to avoid Gorlak indefinitely. She was teaching him to attack in specific ways, encouraging certain patterns while discouraging others. When he attempted wide, sweeping strikes, she made them easy to deliver by presenting apparent opportunities. When he tried more controlled, efficient attacks, she made them harder to execute through superior positioning. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she was training her opponent. Gorlak, growing frustrated with his inability to connect, began following the patterns she encouraged. His attacks became more predictable, more committed, leaving him off balance for longer periods. And Santos began to close the distance. Her first contact came 15 minutes into the combat. As Gorlak committed to a massive overhead claw strike, Santos slipped inside his guard and delivered a precise strike to a joint in his natural armor. The blow itself caused no significant damage, but it demonstrated something that sent murmurs through the Caltharian observers. She had touched him. The human champion had found a gap in defenses that previous opponents had failed to breach. More concerning was the clinical precision of her attack. She had targeted the exact spot where Gorlak's shoulder armor articulated, a weakness invisible to casual observation but obvious to someone with detailed knowledge of Caltharian anatomy. "How does she know our physiology so precisely?" Hixel whispered. Vextar was beginning to understand. "Computer, display Sergeant Santos's personnel file." The holographic profile materialized beside the observation window, and Vextar's mandibles clicked in growing realization. Maria Santos, age 42, former medical technician with the human colonial marines. Specialized training in xenobiology and battlefield medicine. Multiple tours of duty in sectors with significant Caltharian presence. 23 years of military service before retirement to civilian contractor status. She wasn't just a warrior. She was a warrior who knew exactly how to kill Caltharians. In the chamber below, Santos continued her methodical assault on Gorlak's confidence. Each time he attacked, she demonstrated superior knowledge of his capabilities. She avoided his claws by precisely the minimum distance required, turned his powerful mandibles against empty air, and gradually forced him into increasingly desperate attacks. Gorlak's breathing had become labored, not from physical exhaustion, but from the psychological pressure of facing an opponent who seemed to anticipate his every move. The Caltharian champion had never encountered a foe who understood his species so thoroughly. Santos increased her pressure, landing quick strikes on nerve clusters that caused temporary paralysis in Gorlak's limbs. Each attack was precisely calculated to avoid permanent damage while demonstrating her complete understanding of Caltharian physiology. She wasn't fighting to kill, she was fighting to prove a point. "Impossible," Hixel breathed as Santos landed a combination that left Gorlak staggered and disoriented. No human should possess such knowledge. But Vextar understood now. The humans hadn't chosen their strongest warrior or their fastest fighter. They'd chosen their most knowledgeable. Someone who had spent decades studying Caltharian anatomy, learning their weaknesses, understanding their psychology. Santos didn't need to overpower Gorlak, she merely needed to demonstrate that humans could master any challenge given sufficient time and motivation. The combat's conclusion came suddenly. As Gorlak attempted a desperate charge, Santos stepped aside and struck 3 specific pressure points in rapid sequence. The massive Caltharian warrior collapsed, his nervous system temporarily disrupted by attacks that would have been impossible without intimate knowledge of his species' physiology. Santos stood over her fallen opponent, breathing heavily but showing no signs of significant injury. She looked up at the observation deck and spoke clearly into the chamber's audio sensors. The man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others. Silence filled the observation chamber as the implications became clear. The humans hadn't just won a single combat, they'd demonstrated something far more dangerous. They'd proven that given time to study an enemy, they could master any opponent regardless of physical disadvantages. Admiral Vextar activated the communication array. Combat concluded. Human champion victorious. Caltharian forces will withdraw as agreed. Commander Chen's voice carried obvious satisfaction. Thank you for honoring the terms, Admiral. Safe travels to your fleet. As medical teams entered to tend to both combatants, Vextar stood in contemplative silence. Subcommander Hixel approached hesitantly, her tentacles writhing with confusion and concern. Sir, how do we report this to Fleet Command? A single human defeating our champion? Vextar studied the tactical displays one final time. The siege had lasted 14 days, cost significant resources, and ended with Caltharian withdrawal despite overwhelming numerical superiority. But perhaps that wasn't the most important lesson. We report the truth, Subcommander. That humans are more dangerous than we calculated. And that underestimating them again would be a potentially fatal mistake. The withdrawal began within hours, Caltharian ships departing the system under the terms of their agreement. As Admiral Vextar watched Kepler Station recede on the main viewer, he couldn't shake the memory of Sergeant Santos's pale green eyes, the look of a predator who had been studying her prey for decades. The galaxy had just learned something new about humanity. The question was whether anyone would be wise enough to heed the lesson. 6 months after the Kepler Station incident, the ramifications continued to spread through galactic politics like ripples in still water. The footage of Sergeant Maria Santos systematically dismantling Warrior Prime Gorlak had been analyzed frame by frame by military academies across known space. What had begun as a simple siege had evolved into a case study that fundamentally challenged conventional understanding of human capabilities. Ambassador Thylon Vorthak adjusted her environmental suit as she approached the neutral meeting station orbiting the Centauri system. As the senior Caltharian diplomatic representative to the Galactic Council, she faced the unenviable task of explaining how the Third Fleet's overwhelming advantage had evaporated in a single combat between mismatched opponents. The council chamber buzzed with multilingual conversation as representatives from 47 species discussed humanity's growing influence in contested sectors. Humans had always been considered a minor power, technologically adequate but lacking the natural advantages that made other species dominant in specific fields. Caltharians excelled at warfare, Zephyrians mastered commerce, hegemony worlds controlled information networks. Humans seemed to excel at nothing in particular, making them useful intermediaries but hardly threatening competitors. Until Kepler Station changed everything. The session will now come to order, announced Arbiter Zex Quinn, her crystalline form refracting the chamber's lights into prismatic patterns. Today's primary agenda concerns Resolution 47 regarding territorial disputes in the Outer Rim sectors. Ambassador Vorthak activated her translation matrix as the proceedings began. The resolution in question had been drafted before Kepler Station, when human territorial claims were considered minor irritants easily resolved through economic pressure or limited military action. Now, several council members were reconsidering their positions. The hegemony formally objects to human expansion into the Tau Ceti system, declared Representative Kex, his insectoid features clicking with agitation.
Their presence disrupts established trade routes and threatens commercial stability.
Ambassador Chen Wei rose from the human delegation's position, her diplomatic credentials a stark contrast to the military uniform her species had worn at Kepler Station.
The hegemony's objection is noted, but humanity's claim to Tau Ceti is based on standard colonial law. We established permanent settlements 3 years before the hegemony expressed interest in the system.
Settlement priority laws assume comparable technological development, Kex replied. Human colonies lack the industrial capacity to properly exploit system resources.
Perhaps the hegemony would care to test that assumption?
The chamber fell silent. Chen's words carried implications that had become impossible to ignore after Kepler Station. Humans might lack obvious technological superiority, but they demonstrated an unsettling ability to turn disadvantages into advantages through methods other species hadn't anticipated.
Ambassador Vorthak requested permission to address the assembly.
The Caltharian Republic wishes to share relevant intelligence regarding human colonial capabilities. Arbiter's Exquin's form shifted to indicate attention.
The floor recognizes Ambassador Vorthak.
6 months ago, Third Fleet forces engaged human defenders at Kepler Station under circumstances that provided significant insight into human tactical adaptability. Our analysis suggests that previous assessments of human military potential may have been inadequate.
The hegemony representative's mandibles clicked impatiently. Are we to revise our territorial policies based on a single skirmish?
Not a skirmish, Vorthak corrected.
A demonstration.
The humans didn't simply fight beyond reasonable expectations, they fought with complete understanding of our physiological and psychological weaknesses. They had studied us, learned our patterns, identified vulnerabilities that our own warriors hadn't recognized. She activated the chamber's holographic display, showing tactical recordings from the siege.
Human defenders anticipated our assault patterns with remarkable accuracy.
They improvised weapons and fortifications that exploited specific gaps in our tactical doctrine. Most significantly, they selected a champion for single combat who possessed intimate knowledge of Caltharian anatomy. The recordings played in silence, showing Santos's methodical dismantling of Gorlak through superior knowledge rather than superior strength. When the display concluded, the chamber remained quiet for long moments.
Ambassador Chen spoke carefully.
The Caltharian Republic seems to suggest that human success resulted from advanced preparation rather than inherent capability.
Precisely. Which raises important questions about human activities in other sectors. The implications rippled through the assembled representatives. If humans had spent decades studying Caltharian physiology in preparation for potential conflicts, what had they learned about other species? How many seemingly innocent human researchers, medical technicians, and cultural observers were actually gathering intelligence for future confrontations?
Representative Zalthar of the Aquatic Consortium activated his translation matrix from his water-filled environment pod. The consortium has permitted human researchers to study our deep-water agricultural methods for 15 years.
Are we to assume they've been documenting our vulnerabilities rather than learning our techniques?
The assumption would be prudent, Vorthak replied. The human ambassador maintained her diplomatic composure, but those familiar with human expressions could detect subtle signs of satisfaction. The galaxy was finally beginning to understand what humanity had been doing during their seemingly peaceful expansion across contested territories. Arbiter's Exquin's crystalline form shifted patterns as she processed the session's developments.
Are there specific recommendations the Caltharian Republic wishes to present? 3 primary points, Vorthak began. First, human territorial claims should be evaluated with greater consideration for their demonstrated adaptability.
Second, existing cultural exchange programs with human organizations require security review.
Third, the Galactic Council should formally recognize that humanity represents a more sophisticated strategic threat than previously assessed. Representative Kex's chittering translated as obvious agitation. You're suggesting we treat humans as a major power based on a single tactical victory?
I'm suggesting we treat them as the major power they've already become while we weren't paying attention.
The debate that followed revealed the extent to which human influence had spread throughout galactic civilization. Medical exchange programs had placed human technicians in hospitals across dozens of worlds. Agricultural consultants had studied alien crop cultivation methods on hundreds of colonies.
Diplomatic observers had attended military academies, cultural institutions, and government facilities from the core worlds to the rim territories. Each exchange had been individually insignificant, easily approved under standard cultural cooperation agreements. Collectively, they represented the most comprehensive intelligence-gathering operation in galactic history, conducted in plain sight by a species everyone had dismissed as technologically unremarkable. The humans have played a longer game than any of us realized, Ambassador Vortak concluded as the session's implications became clear. While we focused on immediate territorial disputes and trade advantages, they systematically studied every species they encountered. They learned our weaknesses, our decision-making patterns, our physiological limitations.
They prepared for conflicts that might not occur for decades. Ambassador Chen finally allowed a slight smile. The Caltharian Republic's analysis is characteristically thorough. Perhaps we should discuss how this understanding might inform future diplomatic relations.
The translation carried subtle undertones that experienced diplomats recognized immediately. Chen wasn't offering negotiation, she was offering the choice between cooperation and the kind of conflict that had embarrassed the Caltharian Third Fleet. Over the following days, the Galactic Council's proceedings took on an entirely different character. Territorial disputes that had seemed straightforward became complex as representatives realized they were dealing with opponents who understood them better than they understood themselves. Trade negotiations shifted as partners recognized that humans had been documenting economic vulnerabilities alongside military ones. The hegemony withdrew its objection to human expansion into Tau Ceti. The Aquatic Consortium requested security consultation for their deep water facilities. Even the usually confident Zephyrian Trade Federation began reviewing their commercial agreements with human corporations. But, perhaps the most significant development occurred during a private meeting between Ambassador Vortak and Ambassador Chen in a secured diplomatic suite. "Your people have accomplished something remarkable," Vortak admitted as they sat across from each other without the formal protocols of the council chamber. "You've convinced the galaxy to fear you without actually threatening anyone." Chen poured tea from a service that had become standard in human diplomatic facilities, a subtle reminder of Earth's growing cultural influence. "Fear was never the objective, Ambassador. Respect was. An interesting distinction. Though I suspect the practical difference is minimal." "Perhaps. But, consider this, 6 months ago, the Caltharian Third Fleet felt confident attacking a human civilian station. Today, would Admiral Vextar make the same decision?" Vortak's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. "Unlikely. But, you've created a more dangerous precedent. Every species now wonders what you know about their vulnerabilities." "Good. Mutual uncertainty promotes peaceful resolution of disputes. Or it promotes preemptive strikes by those who believe offense is better than defense." Chen sipped her tea carefully. "That assumes they believe they can achieve surprise against opponents who've been studying them for decades." The conversation continued late into the station's artificial night, two experienced diplomats discussing the new galactic reality that humanity had quietly constructed. By morning, they'd reached an understanding that would reshape political alignments across known space. The Caltharian Republic would sponsor humanity's application for major power status within the Galactic Council. In exchange, humans would share certain medical and technological insights that could benefit Caltharian colonies in harsh environments. Most importantly, both species would cooperate in establishing new protocols for cultural exchange programs that balance legitimate research with security concerns. It was, Ambassador Chen reflected, exactly the kind of negotiated settlement that humans excelled at creating, one where everyone gained something valuable while humanity gained recognition of their true capabilities. Meanwhile, at Kepler Station, Sergeant Maria Santos continued her duties as a civilian contractor, maintaining the hydroponics systems that had provided the setting for her legendary victory. Visiting dignitaries from across the galaxy frequently requested tours of the facility, studying the defensive positions where 300 humans had held off 7,000 Caltharian warriors.
Santos answered their questions with professional courtesy, describing the tactical decisions that had turned civilian infrastructure into effective fortifications.
She never mentioned the years of study that had prepared her for single combat against alien physiology, the countless hours spent mastering pressure points and nerve clusters that could incapacitate opponents without permanent injury. That knowledge remained classified, along with similar expertise possessed by thousands of other human civilians scattered across the galaxy. Former military personnel who'd found peaceful employment as medical technicians, agricultural consultants, cultural observers, and diplomatic staff. Each carrying specialized knowledge about the species they worked alongside, knowledge that might never be needed but would be available if circumstances required. The galaxy had learned to respect human adaptability and preparation. What they hadn't yet realized was that Santos represented not an exception but a pattern, one of many humans positioned throughout known space, ready to prove that the man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others. The Kepler station incident had been humanity's announcement that they were ready to play on the galactic stage. What came next would demonstrate whether other species were wise enough to accept them as equals rather than test them as enemies. In the observation lounge where Admiral Vextar had once planned the siege, tourists from dozens of worlds now gathered to view the chamber where everything had changed. They studied the scarred walls, the improvised fortifications, the precisely calculated defensive positions that had turned a civilian facility into an impregnable fortress. Most visitors left with greater appreciation for human ingenuity and determination. A few left with troubling questions about what other surprises humanity might have prepared. And a very small number left with the uncomfortable realization that their own species' vulnerabilities might already be thoroughly understood by opponents they'd consistently underestimated. The ripples from Kepler station continued to spread, carrying with them a new understanding of humanity's place in the galaxy. The question that remained was whether that understanding would lead to cooperation or conflict, and whether other species possessed the wisdom to choose correctly. 2 years had passed since the Kepler station incident, and the galaxy had adapted to humanity's elevated status with varying degrees of acceptance. The Galactic Council now included human representatives in major policy discussions, territorial disputes were resolved through negotiation rather than force, and cultural exchange programs operated under new security protocols that acknowledged the intelligence-gathering potential of seemingly innocent research. But not everyone was comfortable with the new order. Deep in the Outer Rim territories, where galactic law held minimal influence and old prejudices died hard, the Helix Syndicate had been planning humanity's downfall. Unlike the established governments that had learned to respect human capabilities, the Syndicate represented criminal organizations, pirate fleets, and rogue military units that saw humanity's rise as a threat to their profitable operations. Marcus Riley checked his chronometer as he made his final rounds through the mining colony on Zirian Prime. As security chief for Tranquil Industries operations in the sector, he'd spent the last 18 months turning a collection of ramshackle prefab modules into a profitable extraction facility. The work had been challenging but straightforward, establishing perimeter defenses, training local security personnel, and coordinating with colonial authorities to maintain order. What he hadn't anticipated was becoming the target of an elaborate trap designed to test humanity's reputation for adaptability. The first sign of trouble came through the emergency communication array at 0347 local time. Riley's assistant, Dr. Angela Vasquez, burst into the security office with datapad clutched in her trembling hands. Marcus, were receiving distress signals from the orbital platform. Multiple ships dropping out of hyperspace, weapons hot, demanding immediate surrender. Riley activated the external sensors, studying the tactical display with professional calm. 12 vessels surrounded Zirian Prime, their configurations identifying them as modified cargo haulers equipped with military-grade weapons. The ships bore no standard identification codes, but their attack patterns suggested experienced commanders with detailed knowledge of the colony's defenses. How many people do we have groundside? 47 staff members plus 32 colonial security personnel. The morning shift hasn't started yet. Riley's mind automatically cataloged available resources. The colony possessed standard defensive emplacements designed to deter opportunistic raiders, not organized military assault. Evacuation to orbital facilities was impossible with hostile ships controlling the space lanes.
Communication with galactic authorities would take days given their remote location. They were effectively isolated, outnumbered, and facing opponents who'd clearly planned this attack with considerable care. "Sir," came a voice through the communication array, speaking heavily accented standard that Riley's linguistic training identified as originating from the vegan trade routes. "This is Captain Drivak of the Helix Syndicate. You will surrender immediately or face the consequences." Riley activated the response channel. "This is Security Chief Marcus Riley. State your demands." "No demands, human. This is a test. We want to see if your species' reputation is deserved or merely clever propaganda." The transmission continued, and Riley realized they were facing something far more dangerous than a simple raid. This was a deliberate challenge to humanity's newfound status, designed to either prove or disprove the capabilities demonstrated at Kepler Station. "You have 79 people under your protection," Captain Drivak continued. "We have sufficient firepower to reduce your facility to radioactive debris. But, we're offering you the same choice your people gave the Caltharians: single combat. One of yours against one of ours. Winner determines the outcome." Dr. Vasquez whispered urgently. "Marcus, this is insane. We need to evacuate, call for backup, anything except what terms?" Riley asked, cutting off her protests. "Standard format. No weapons, no armor, no external assistance. Your champion against ours in neutral environment. If you win, we withdraw and guarantee safe passage for your people. If you lose." "If we lose?" "Everyone dies, and the galaxy learns that human victories are flukes rather than demonstrations of superiority." Riley studied the tactical display, mind working through possibilities with methodical precision. Unlike the Caltharian siege, this confrontation offered no strategic alternatives. The Syndicate ships maintained positions that prevented evacuation while their ground sensors indicated scouting parties already approaching the colony perimeter. They intended to make good on their threat regardless of the combat's outcome, unless humanity could demonstrate the same psychological dominance that had worked at Kepler Station. "I accept your terms," Riley said finally. "Time and location?" 1 hour. "The plateau ridge approximately 2 kilometers northeast of your facility. Neutral ground with excellent visibility for recording purposes." The transmission ended, leaving Riley and Dr. Vasquez alone in the security office. Outside, the facility's emergency lighting cast everything in red-tinged shadows while automated systems prepared for potential assault. "Marcus, you can't seriously be considering this," Vasquez said. "We know nothing about their champion. They could send anything: augmented soldiers, alien species with natural advantages, combat androids if they could," Riley agreed. "But they want to prove humanity's reputation is undeserved. Sending an obviously superior opponent would undermine their own propaganda value." He activated his personal communication device, sending coded messages to key personnel throughout the facility. Unlike Kepler Station's siege, they had minimal time for preparation and no opportunity for extensive defensive positioning. This would be resolved through individual capability rather than collective effort. Besides, Riley continued, checking his equipment with practiced efficiency, they've made a fundamental error in their approach. "What error?" "They assume our reputation is based on exceptional individuals rather than systematic preparation." Dr. Vasquez studied his expression, recognizing the same calm confidence that Sergeant Santos had displayed before her legendary victory. "Marcus, what exactly was your specialty before you became a civilian contractor?" Riley smiled grimly as he secured his gear. "Xenobiology research. Specifically, physiological vulnerabilities in non-human species. 20 years with colonial intelligence before I took this position." Understanding dawned in Vasquez's eyes. Like Santos, Riley wasn't simply a capable fighter who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. He was another example of humanity's systematic approach to galactic challenges, a specialist positioned where he might be needed, carrying knowledge that could prove decisive if circumstances required. "The Syndicate has been planning this for months," Riley continued as they prepared to depart for the combat site.
They studied the Kepler station recordings, analyzed our tactical methods, selected what they believed were optimal conditions for proving human victories were exceptional rather than representative.
But, they missed something? They missed everything. They focused on replicating the external circumstances while ignoring the underlying preparation that made those circumstances favorable. The journey to the plateau took 30 minutes through Zirion Prime's harsh terrain.
Riley used the time to study intelligence files on syndicate operations, cross-referencing known personnel with physiological databases that colonial intelligence had compiled over decades of contact with various species. The combat site was a natural amphitheater carved from wind-sculpted rock formations.
Syndicate personnel had established recording equipment around the perimeter, clearly intending to broadcast the proceedings throughout their operational territory. This confrontation was designed as much for psychological impact as tactical resolution.
Captain Dravak awaited their arrival, his reptilian features marking him as a native of the Serpentine systems. Beside him stood the Syndicate champion, a massive humanoid with metallic skin and artificial limb enhancements that identified him as a cyborg collective exile.
Impressive, Riley murmured, studying his opponent's augmentations.
They've brought a former collective enforcer. Enhanced strength, integrated weapons systems, tactical analysis software.
Dr. Vasquez paled as she realized the implications.
Marcus, that thing could tear apart an armored vehicle.
Could. But, won't.
The cyborg champion stepped forward, his artificial components gleaming in Zirion Prime's pale sunlight. When he spoke, his voice carried electronic harmonics that indicated extensive modification to his vocal apparatus.
I am designated Combat Unit Sigma-7. I have defeated 43 opponents in formal combat. Your species' reputation will not save you.
Riley approached the center of the combat area, removing unnecessary equipment until he wore only basic clothing suitable for physical confrontation.
Security Chief Marcus Riley, Colonial Intelligence Specialist. Pleased to meet you.
Captain Dravak activated the recording systems, his scaled features displaying obvious satisfaction.
Let the galaxy witness the true capabilities of both species. Combat will continue until decisive resolution.
The engagement began with Sigma-7 advancing methodically, his enhanced systems analyzing Riley's physical capabilities while calculating optimal attack patterns. The cyborg's augmented strength allowed devastating strikes that could shatter bone, while his tactical software provided real-time assessment of combat variables. Riley circled his opponent carefully, studying the integration points where organic and artificial components merged.
Unlike purely biological foes, cyborgs presented unique vulnerabilities related to their mechanical modifications, if one possessed sufficient knowledge to exploit them. Sigma-7's first attack came as a lightning-fast combination that would have overwhelmed most opponents.
Riley avoided the strikes through precise positioning that kept him just beyond the cyborg's enhanced reach while remaining close enough to study his opponent's systems in detail.
Each mechanical component told a story.
The arm enhancements were military-grade collective hardware, designed for maximum power rather than subtlety. The leg modifications provided enhanced speed and jumping capability but required specific balancing algorithms. Most importantly, the neural interfaces that controlled these systems operated on standardized protocols that colonial intelligence had studied extensively.
Impossible, Captain Dravak muttered as Riley continued evading attacks that should have been unavoidable. His movement patterns are too precise.
The human cannot predict enhanced tactical algorithms. But prediction wasn't required when one understood the algorithm's limitations. Riley had spent years studying cyborg collective technology, learning the weaknesses that their own engineers had built into their systems. Enhanced strength required increased power consumption.
Advanced tactical analysis consumed processing cycles that created momentary vulnerabilities. Most critically, the neural interfaces that controlled augmented systems could be disrupted through specific pressure point techniques that affected the organic components they were attached to.
Sigma-7's attacks became increasingly aggressive as his tactical software failed to account for an opponent with detailed knowledge of cyborg limitations. The combat unit's programming had been designed for confronting conventional enemies, not specialists who understood exactly how his systems operated.
Riley's counterattack began 20 minutes into the engagement.
As Sigma-7 committed to a devastating combination that should have ended the fight, Riley slipped inside his guard and struck 3 precise points along the cyborg's spine where neural interfaces connected to his artificial limbs. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Sigma-7's enhanced systems experienced cascading failures as their control signals became corrupted. His augmented strength became a liability as his own limbs began operating against his conscious commands. System malfunction, the cyborg announced in electronic tones that carried obvious confusion. Initiating emergency protocols. But Riley had anticipated the emergency protocols as well. His next series of strikes targeted the backup systems that collective engineers had installed to prevent exactly this kind of system failure. Within minutes, Sigma-7 stood immobilized by his own augmentations, his mechanical components locked in a state of technological paralysis. Combat concluded, Riley announced, breathing heavily but showing no significant injury. Your champion has been defeated through systematic knowledge of his technological vulnerabilities. The plateau fell silent except for the wind whistling through rock formations and the electronic whining of Sigma-7's malfunctioning systems. Captain Dravok stared at the scene in obvious disbelief, his scaled features reflecting shock that his carefully planned demonstration had backfired so completely. How, he demanded. Collective technology is supposed to be immune to conventional attack methods. Riley approached the recording equipment, speaking directly into the cameras that would carry his words throughout Syndicate territory. No technology is immune to opponents who understand its principles. The cyborg collective builds impressive systems, but they also document their designs extensively. Colonial intelligence has studied those documents for decades. He gestured towards Sigma-7's immobilized form. Your champion fell to the same systematic preparation that defeated Warrior Prime Gorlak at Kepler Station. Humans don't rely on superior individual capability, we rely on superior collective knowledge applied at the decisive moment. Captain Dravok's mandibles clicked nervously as he realized the implications. The Syndicate had intended to prove human victories were exceptional incidents rather than representative capabilities. Instead, they'd provided evidence that humanity's reputation was based on systematic advantages that could be replicated across multiple encounters. This proves nothing, Dravok protested. You had advanced knowledge of our champion's specifications. Did I? Or do I represent the same pattern of systematic preparation that your intelligence analysis should have identified before initiating this confrontation? Riley's words carried implications that extended far beyond the immediate combat. The Syndicate had focused on replicating the external circumstances of Kepler Station without understanding the underlying preparation that made human victories possible. They'd treated humanity's reputation as propaganda rather than evidence of systematic capabilities. The man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others, Riley continued, repeating the phrase that had become humanity's unofficial motto since Sergeant Santos first spoke it. The Syndicate made the mistake of assuming we hadn't destroyed our own weaknesses through decades of preparation. The recording equipment captured everything: Sigma-7's technological failure, Captain Dravok's obvious confusion, and Riley's calm explanation of the principles that made such victories possible. When the footage reached Syndicate territory, it would carry a message that criminal organizations couldn't ignore. Humanity's reputation wasn't based on exceptional individuals or lucky circumstances. It was based on systematic preparation for challenges that might not occur for decades, combined with the patience to position specialists where they might be needed and the wisdom to learn from every encounter with potential adversaries. The Syndicate withdrawal began within hours, their ships departing Xerion Prime under the agreed terms while their leadership reconsidered the wisdom of testing human capabilities. The footage of Combat Unit Sigma-7's defeat spread throughout criminal networks, carrying with it a new understanding of the risks involved in challenging human interests. At Colonial Intelligence Headquarters, the Xerion Prime incident was catalogued alongside similar encounters from across human space. Dr. Patricia Kowalski, the agency's xenological specialist, added Riley's tactical report to the growing database of human victories achieved through systematic knowledge rather than superior force. Pattern confirmed, she noted in her official summary. Hostile organizations continue to misinterpret human capabilities as exceptional individual performance rather than systematic collective preparation.
Recommend continued deployment of specialists to probable flashpoint locations.
The recommendation was approved, ensuring that more Marcus Rileys and Maria Santos's would be positioned throughout human territory. Former intelligence operatives, military specialists, and xenobiological experts carrying classified knowledge about alien species' vulnerabilities. The galaxy was learning that humanity's rise to major power status hadn't been achieved through technological breakthroughs or military conquest. It had been accomplished through the patient accumulation of knowledge about potential adversaries, combined with the systematic deployment of that knowledge when circumstances required. Each victory reinforced the lesson that underestimating human preparation was a potentially fatal mistake. And each defeated opponent carried that lesson back to their own organizations, spreading the understanding that humanity had earned their place in galactic politics through capabilities that extended far beyond what most species had recognized. The man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others, and humanity had spent decades systematically destroying every weakness that might make them vulnerable to alien threats. The galaxy was finally beginning to understand what that preparation meant for anyone foolish enough to test it. On Zirion Prime, Marcus Riley returned to his duties as security chief for Tranquil Industries, filing his official report as a routine encounter with hostile forces that had been resolved through standard security protocols. The colonial government noted the incident in their records and recommended commendations for personnel involved. What they didn't record was the broader pattern that Riley's victory represented, another demonstration that humanity's reputation was built on foundations solid enough to support their growing influence throughout known space. And another warning to potential adversaries that challenging human interests required more careful consideration than most organizations had previously provided. The test of humanity's resolve had been conducted and passed. The question that remained was whether the galaxy's criminal elements possessed sufficient wisdom to learn from the Syndicate's mistake, or whether they would require additional demonstrations of human preparedness before accepting the new reality. Time would provide the answer, as it always did. But the pattern was already clear to those with sufficient knowledge to recognize it. Humanity had positioned themselves for success through decades of systematic preparation, and they were ready for whatever challenges the galaxy might present. The man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others, and humanity had proven once again that they understood the true meaning of those words.